You will not defy this court!
A 10-year-old boy stood alone before a judge who was supposed to protect him. Instead, that judge laughed, mocked him, dismissed him like he was nothing. The courtroom, filled with spectators, lawyers, and police, watched as this child, clutching his backpack, faced a system that had already decided he didn't matter. His mother sat in handcuffs, tears streaming down her face, while the judge shouted over her pleas for mercy. But what no one in that courtroom knew, what the judge couldn't have possibly imagined, was that this little boy had been preparing for this moment his entire life. What happened next didn't just shock everyone in that room. It exposed a truth about our justice system that most people never see. This is the story of how a child's courage revealed the ugliest face of racism hiding behind a gavel. Marcus Thompson was 10 years old, but he'd already learned lessons most adults never face. He lived with his mother, Diane, in a small 2-bedroom apartment on the south side of the city, where the streetlights flickered at night and the sirens never really stopped. Diane worked 2 jobs, mornings at a nursing home, evenings cleaning office buildings downtown. She was the kind of mother who made sure Marcus had breakfast, even when she skipped it herself, the kind who walked him to the library every Saturday, no matter how tired she was, because she believed education was the only way out. Marcus was sharp, scary sharp. Teachers noticed it early, the way he absorbed information like a sponge, the way he asked questions that made adults pause. He devoured books about history, law, civil rights. He knew the names of Supreme Court justices before he knew his multiplication tables. His 4th-grade teacher once said he argued like a lawyer. Diane would smile when she heard that, but there was always sadness behind it. She knew the world didn't care how smart a black boy was. She knew it would try to break him anyway. Their neighborhood was the kind of place where people looked out for each other because no one else would. Mrs. Patterson next door babysat Marcus when Diane worked late. Mr. Jenkins at the corner store gave him free juice boxes and told him stories about the old days when the neighborhood was thriving before the factories closed. But it was also the kind of place where police cars rolled through slowly, windows down, eyes scanning, where every young black man was a suspect, where mothers held their breath every time their sons left the house. Diane had been stopped by police 17 times in 3 years. 17 times for things like driving too slow, looking suspicious, matching a description. She kept every ticket, every warning, every dismissal in a folder at home. She told Marcus these were his history lessons, the ones they didn't teach in school. She taught him to keep his hands visible, to say yes sir and no ma'am, to never, ever give them a reason. But she also taught him something else, that being respectful didn't mean accepting injustice, that knowing the law was a weapon when you had nothing else. One Tuesday in March, Diane was driving Marcus home from his chess club meeting when she saw the blue lights in her rearview mirror. Her heart sank. Marcus felt her tense up. "Mama?" he said softly. She squeezed his hand. "It's okay, baby. Just stay quiet." The officer approached, hand resting on his gun. Diane had a broken tail light, something she'd been saving up to fix, but when the officer ran her license, something came back, a bench warrant. For an unpaid traffic ticket from 2 years ago that Diane swore she'd paid. She had the receipt at home, but that didn't matter. Within minutes, she was in handcuffs. Marcus watched his mother cry as they put her in the back of the police car. "Don't take her!" he shouted, his voice cracking. "She didn't do anything wrong!" The officer barely looked at him. "Son, you need to call a family member to come get you." But there was no family, just Mrs. Patterson, who didn't drive, just a 10-year-old boy, watching the only person who'd ever protected him being taken away. What Marcus didn't know yet was that this wasn't just a traffic stop. This was the beginning of a nightmare that would drag his mother into a system designed to chew up people like her and spit them out. And 3 weeks later, when he walked into that courtroom, he'd be facing a judge who'd already made up his mind, before Diane ever said a word. The courtroom smelled like old wood and broken dreams. Marcus sat in the gallery, backpack on his lap, while his mother stood before Judge William Harrington. Judge Harrington was a white man in his 60s, with silver hair, a reputation for being tough on crime, and a record of disproportionately harsh sentences for black defendants that somehow never made the local news. He looked at Diane the way you'd look at something stuck to your shoe. "Ms. Thompson," the judge said, not even glancing at the paperwork in front of him, "you're here for failure to appear, unpaid fines, and," he paused, a smirk creeping across his face, "apparently you thought you could just ignore the law because it's inconvenient for you." Diane's public defender, a young woman fresh out of law school with too many cases and not enough time, started to speak. "Your Honor, Miss Thompson has proof she paid." "I'm not interested in excuses," Harrington cut her off. "I see this every single day. People who think rules don't apply to them. People who waste this court's time." The way he said people, everyone in that room knew what he meant. Marcus felt his chest tighten. He watched his mother's shoulders shake, watched her try to explain that she had the receipt, that she'd never missed a court date in her life, that she was working 2 jobs to provide for her son. Harrington barely listened. He was already flipping through his calendar, calculating bail amounts, deciding her fate while she was still mid-sentence. "Your Honor, please," Diane said, her voice breaking. "I have a son. He's here. He needs me." "Well, you should have thought about that before you broke the law," Harrington said coldly. Then he looked over at Marcus for the first time, actually looked at him, and what came out of his mouth next would change everything. "Is that him, the boy?" Harrington's lip curled. "Maybe he needs to learn what happens when people don't follow the rules. Might do him some good to see consequences. Lord knows kids like him need to learn early." The courtroom went silent. Kids like him. The words hung in the air like poison. Marcus felt something crack open inside him. Not fear, not sadness, rage. Pure, clarifying rage. He'd read about judges like this. He'd studied cases like this. He knew exactly what was happening. This wasn't about an unpaid ticket. This wasn't about the law. This was about a judge who looked at his mother and saw someone disposable, someone who could be humiliated, degraded, and discarded because of the color of her skin. Diane was crying now. The police officer standing next to her put a hand on her arm, not comforting, restraining, like she might run, like she might fight back. The public defender was shuffling papers, already resigned to losing. The spectators in the gallery watched with a mixture of pity and discomfort. No one was going to stop this. No one was going to speak up, because this is how the system worked. Harrington leaned back in his chair, enjoying himself now. "Bail is set at $5,000. Ms. Thompson, you'll remain in custody until you can pay, if you can pay." Another smirk. "Next case." That's when Marcus stood up. "Your Honor, I have something to say." The entire courtroom turned to look at him. The judge frowned. "Excuse me?" "I said, I have something to say, Your Honor." Marcus walked forward, his backpack still on his shoulders, his hands trembling, but his eyes locked on Harrington. "You can't do this." The judge's face flushed red. "Sit down, son. This is not a playground." "I know it's not a playground," Marcus said, moving closer to the front. "It's a court of law, and what you're doing right now is illegal." A murmur rippled through the gallery. The public defender looked stunned. The police officer took a step forward, but Harrington held up a hand, his eyes narrowing on this child who dared to challenge him. "You think you know the law, boy?" Harrington said, his voice dripping with condescension. "I know the 8th Amendment. Excessive bail shall not be required. You set my mama's bail for $5,000 for an unpaid traffic ticket. That's excessive. That's unconstitutional." Harrington laughed. Actually laughed. "You've been watching too much TV, kid.
This is the real world. I know it's the real world. I also know the 14th Amendment, equal protection under the law. You called my mama's case a wasted time before you even heard it. You said kids like me need to learn. What did you mean by kids like me, Your Honor? The room went dead silent. Harrington's smile disappeared. Watch your tone. You're violating her due process rights. My mom has a receipt that proves she paid that ticket 2 years ago. She tried to show you. You wouldn't look. That violates the Fifth Amendment. No person shall be deprived of liberty without due process of law. Here it is, dated, stamped, paid in full. The public defender's jaw dropped. She reached for the receipt, looked at it, then looked at the judge. Your Honor, this changes everything. She has proof of payment. Harrington's face was now a deep shade of red. He wasn't just angry. He was humiliated, exposed by a child in front of a full courtroom. That doesn't prove anything. It proves she's innocent. It proves you didn't care about the truth. You just wanted to punish her. You said she was wasting the court's time, but you didn't even give her a chance to defend herself. That's not justice, that's prejudice. Someone in the gallery whispered, "Oh my God." Someone else started recording on their phone. Harrington slammed his gavel. That's enough. Bailiff, remove this child from my courtroom. On what grounds? Marcus challenged. I'm not disrupting. I'm exercising my First Amendment right to free speech. I'm defending my mother's Sixth Amendment right to counsel and a fair trial. You can't remove me unless I'm breaking the law, and I'm not, but you are. The courtroom erupted. People were standing now, some calling out in support, others in shock. The bailiff didn't know what to do. The public defender was frantically flipping through her notes, realizing this 10-year-old boy had just done more for her client in 3 minutes than she'd done in 3 weeks. Judge Harrington stared at Marcus with something between fury and fear because he knew this boy was right. And worse, he knew everyone was watching.
Sit down, Harrington growled, his voice barely controlled. Now. No, Marcus said. His voice didn't waver. Not until you look at the evidence. Not until you treat my mama like a human being. The judge's hand gripped the gavel so hard his knuckles turned white. For a moment it looked like he might explode. But then he glanced at the gallery, at the phones recording, at the public defender who was now standing with the receipt in her hand. And he knew. He knew if he lost control now, if he punished this boy for speaking truth, it would be all over the news by morning. Judge humiliates black child in court. Judge denies evidence to jail single mother. Judge exposed for racial bias. So he did something worse. He smiled. You're a smart kid, Harrington said, his tone shifting to something sickly sweet. Real smart. But you know what? The law is complicated. It's not something a child can understand just from reading a few books. He turned to Diane. Miss Thompson, I'm going to give you a chance. If you can provide documented proof of payment within 24 hours, I'll dismiss this warrant. But until then, bail stands. It was a trap. Diane didn't have 24 hours. She didn't have $5,000. She'd be sitting in a cell while Marcus tried to navigate a bureaucracy designed to make things impossible. It was a way for Harrington to maintain control while appearing merciful, a way to punish her without looking like the villain. But Marcus saw through it immediately. That's not how the law works, he said. You can't hold someone on a warrant that's already been satisfied. If she has proof of payment right now, and she does, you have to dismiss it right now. That's the law. Harrington's smile turned to ice. Are you telling me how to do my job? I'm reminding you what your job is, to uphold the Constitution, to be impartial, to treat everyone equally no matter what they look like. You need to learn respect. I respect the law. I respect my mama. I don't respect a judge who violates both. The courtroom gasped. Even the public defender took a step back. You didn't talk to a judge like that. Not if you wanted to walk out of the courtroom free. But Marcus wasn't thinking about himself anymore. He was thinking about every time his mother had been pulled over. Every time she'd been treated like a criminal for the crime of existing while black. Every time she told him to stay quiet, stay small, stay safe. He was done staying quiet.
Harrington stood up, towering over the bench, his face twisted with rage. "Bailiff, escort this child out of my courtroom immediately. And Miss Thompson, bail is now $10,000 for contempt." "You can't do that," the public defender finally found her voice. "Your Honor, with all due respect, this is outrageous. The boy is right. The receipt shows proof of payment. You are obligated to review it. If you don't, I'll file an immediate appeal and I'll contact the State Judicial Review Board. This will not stand." For the first time, fear flickered across Harrington's face. Real fear. Because he knew what would happen if this case went to review, if a 10-year-old's courtroom speech went viral, if people started digging into his record, his pattern of sentencing disparities, his history of behavior like this. He looked at Marcus, looked at Diane, looked at the cameras, and he knew he'd lost. "Fine," he spat. "Let me see the receipt." The public defender handed it over. Harrington barely glanced at it before throwing it down on the bench. "Case dismissed," he muttered. "Miss Thompson is free to go." But even as he said it, even as the bailiff unlocked Diane's handcuffs, Harrington leaned forward and locked eyes with Marcus. "You just made a very big mistake, son," he said quietly, so only Marcus could hear. "You think you won something today? You have no idea what you just started." Marcus stared back, unflinching. "Neither do you, Your Honor." Diane stumbled forward, grabbed Marcus, and held him so tight he could barely breathe. She was sobbing. He was crying too. Around them, the courtroom erupted in applause, people cheering, shouting, someone yelling, "That's right!" But all Marcus could hear was his mother's heartbeat against his ear, and all he could feel was the weight of what he'd just done. He'd won, but he had also declared war.
The video went viral within hours. Someone in the courtroom had captured the whole thing. Marcus standing before Judge Harrington, speaking constitutional law, defending his mother with the precision of a seasoned attorney. By the next morning, it had millions of views. News stations picked it up. Civil rights organizations reached out. Lawyers began examining Judge Harrington's record. And what they found was damning. A pattern of excessive bail for black defendants, disproportionate sentencing, dismissive treatment of public defenders representing minorities. Within 2 weeks, Judge Harrington was suspended pending investigation. Within 3 months, he quietly retired. An investigation revealed dozens of similar cases, people like Diane who'd been trapped in the system over minor infractions, people who'd lost jobs, homes, children, because a judge decided they were disposable. But none of that erased what happened in that courtroom. Diane struggled for months afterward. She had nightmares about police cars, about courtrooms, about losing Marcus. She developed anxiety around authority figures. Marcus noticed she flinched now when she saw officers. She stopped playing music in the car because she was afraid it would give them a reason to pull her over. The system had released her body, but kept her mind in chains. Marcus changed too. He became quieter, more watchful. The other kids at school treated him like a hero, but he didn't feel like one. He felt tired. He'd seen something that day that he couldn't unsee. The machinery of injustice, oiled and running smoothly, designed to grind people down. He'd thrown a wrench in it, sure, but the machine was still there, still running, still destroying lives. But he also learned something else. He learned that knowledge was power, that a child with a backpack full of books and a heart full of courage could stand up to the system and win. Not always, not easily, but sometimes. And sometimes was enough to matter. Diane started volunteering with a local organization that helped people navigate the legal system. She used her story to advocate for bail reform, for accountability in the courts, for an end to the kind of predatory practices that had almost destroyed her family. Marcus went with her sometimes, sitting quietly in the back of community meetings, listening to other people's stories, stories just like her mother's, stories that ended worse. One night, after a particularly difficult meeting where a woman broke down describing how her son was killed by police during a traffic stop, Diane asked Marcus if he still wanted to be a lawyer when he grew up. He'd been talking about it for years, but she wondered if what he'd seen, what he'd experienced, had changed his mind. Marcus thought for a long time before answering. "Yeah,"
he finally said. "More than ever. Because somebody has to fix this, Mama. Somebody has to make it stop." She kissed his forehead and held him close. This boy who'd already seen too much. This child who'd been forced to grow up too fast in a courtroom that should have protected him. The truth is, Marcus's story isn't unique. It's exceptional in its outcome. Most 10-year-olds don't know constitutional law. Most don't have the courage to stand up in court. Most don't win. But the injustice he faced, the way Judge Harrington looked at him and his mother, the presumption of guilt, the mockery, the cruelty disguised as justice, that happens every single day in courtrooms across this country. It happens to black mothers pulled over for broken taillights, to black fathers stopped for fitting a description, to black children who learn too young that the system doesn't see them as children, it sees them as threats. It happens in ways big and small, loud and quiet, until it becomes background noise, until we stop noticing, until we accept it as normal. But it's not normal. It's not acceptable, and it's not inevitable. What Marcus did that day wasn't just about saving his mother. It was about refusing to accept that this is just how things are. It was about looking at a judge who represented centuries of systemic oppression and saying, "Not today, not to us, not anymore." The question isn't whether the system is broken. We know it is. The question is, what are we going to do about it? Are we going to keep scrolling past stories like this, shaking our heads, feeling briefly outraged before moving on? Or are we going to recognize that every time we witness injustice and do nothing, we become part of the machinery that perpetuates it? Marcus was 10 years old. He had a backpack and a receipt and the courage to speak truth to power. What do you have? And what are you going to do with it?